Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Industry. What industry, you say? The industry. The video series where we're going to discuss the job market, give career guidance, market intel, and everything in between. My name is Zach Plotkin, joined by my co-host Sanjeev Menon from Madison-Davis. And today we are going to be speaking with Natasha Vernier, the CEO of Cable. Cable is a Regtech company that, from what I understand, helps banks and fintechs continuously test whether their AML and sanctions programs and their controls are actually working. Welcome, Natasha.
Thank you so much for having me, Zach, Sanjeev. It's great to be here.
Happy we finally got this on the books. Did I explain that correctly?
You sure did. Yeah, we automate control testing. That's right.
Perfect. And one of the reasons why we wanted to have Natasha on is obviously our firms have had relationships in the past where we come across each other quite a bit, and she's somebody that's well known in the industry, somebody that has a good name, and obviously we wanted to give the people a little bit about your background as well.
Yeah, delighted to chat about it. What can I tell you?
So I'm kind of curious, based on your background. I mean, whenever we do these things, people do tend to look up people's LinkedIn's. I'm kind of curious how you got your start and kind of where this whole thing kind of came from, because when I looked at your background and when we've spoken before, it looks like you had nothing to do with this space at all when you started out.
Absolutely nothing to do with it. And honestly, didn't know anything about it and had no intention of entering this space. And I think back to my first job and like the things I thought about that were important in my early career. And really, I got a job, and it was important to get a good job out of university, and it mattered a lot less what it was. And I didn't realize that at the time, but my first job was at Ernst & Young. I was on the graduate training program. I got my accountancy qualification over my 3 years there. I very much enjoyed my time at Ernst & Young, and I have a huge amount of respect for a lot of my past colleagues there. I didn't love that work, and so I knew pretty quickly that I wanted to move on. But having Ernst & Young on my CV, on my resume, and having those contacts and having that experience really set me up to figure out what was next. And there was no grand plan at that stage to get into tech. There was no grand plan. I honestly did not know what financial crime compliance, what all of that meant. But it set me up really well. From there, I went to a boutique corporate finance house, also based in London, Clearwater International, and I worked on business service M&A for a couple of years. So I was selling recruitment companies. I was selling other kind of smallish businesses, maybe 20 to 50 people, making something like 2 to 5 million in EBITDA to either larger corporates or to private equity. And whilst I was doing that, I discovered about this thing called tech. And in London at that point in time, and we're talking about 2015, there was a kind of really thriving up and coming tech scene in East London. And there were lots of meetups and lots of cool events to go to. And I started going to those. I also have a great friend who was building a startup in London at that time, which was pretty early and pretty rare to find in London. And he helped me kind of figure out what it all meant and what I could do. That led me to Monzo, and I can tell you more about that stepping stone if that's interesting.
I love that. Monzo's crushing it now in the UK.
Yeah. I mean, so do you want me to just keep explaining what I did next? Yeah. All right. Keep going.
Yeah.
So I was at Clearwater Corporate Finance. I'd had a great couple of years there, and I had a couple of my bosses, the sort of senior leaders there, who were really supportive, and I was getting a lot of exposure to really interesting deals. But I kind of just knew that I wanted to get into this tech scene. I wanted to change my career trajectory. I knew I didn't want to stay in corporate finance. So I started going to these meetups. I was talking to this friend I mentioned about technology and what it meant to work in there and all of the innovation that was happening. And I started trying to think about the areas of tech that I would be able to have an impact in and that I would find interesting, given my background. Before I did my accounting qualification at Ernst & Young, I had a law degree. So legal, finance, 5 years in corporate finance, like what area kind of made sense. I landed on, at the time, what we were calling challenger banking in the UK. And there were four main players in London at that time. There was Revolut, Starling, Tandem, and what was called Monzo at the time. And I chose Monzo. I thought that Tom Blomfield, the CEO, the founder, was really interesting. I thought he was really smart. I thought what they were trying to do, the way they were trying to do it, was really aligned with what I wanted to do. And at that point in time, I think they were sort of 10 people. There were no jobs advertised on the website. And so I just emailed him and I was like, this is my background. I want to start a bank. If I were to start a bank, this is what I would do. These are the features I'd want. And they had no recruitment process at that point in time. So I went and met the team. I had some great conversations and they asked me to set up an event for them. And so I organized an event, having never done anything like that before. I got 150 or so people to come to this event. I organized a panel. I got some food and drinks for free to come help out and put on this event. And then they were like, cool, that was a good event. What do you want to do? And I was like,
woman.
And I was like, well, I don't know. Like, it was just a tech event to get people to hear about Monzo, to bring people together in the tech community. There was like no clear metric that I was trying to move. It wasn't like we need 10 signups. At that point, we were not signing up customers. It was before we even launched the prepaid card in the UK. So then they were like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, this is my background. Like, I'll do anything. And they were like, cool, come and join as business operations, right? Like that classic early hire. And before I then took a bit of a gamble and I was like, I want to come and join you, but this is a career change for me. And it feels like a point in time at which I can also go do something for a little bit and learn something. And so I said, could I actually delay? I want to go learn to code. And so I applied to General Assembly to do a full stack coding bootcamp. And I actually came to San Francisco to do that. And I punted my start at Monzo by another 3 months. And I came to San Francisco, where I live now, actually. And I learned to code for 3 months, which was awesome. I also actually during that time met my wife, not on the coding course, just in San Francisco. We now live here with 2 kids, so that worked out great. And then I went back to London and I started at Monzo in January 2016. And by that point, there were sort of 12 or 13 people in the company. We had just started giving out prepaid cards to people in the office at these like in-person events. And that was the beginning of my Monzo time. Yeah.
That is a wild story.
Only in Europe. Only in Europe would they allow you to go like do a 3-month sabbatical before you start your job.
Well, you have to remember, that was after my 3-month notice period at my corporate finance job. And that was cool because that was during the summer of 2015. And if I recall, there was a lot of sport that summer. There was a lot of tennis on and there was a lot of cricket on. So I was keeping up with all that. Yeah. And then obviously I joined Monzo in business operations. Yeah.
Was your job were you, I know it was business, it was all hands on deck at a startup that size. Were you doing financial crimes like off the bat?
No. I don't think anyone at the company, that's not true. There were definitely people at the company who were writing the regulatory business plan, who knew that we were going to build out a compliance function and so on. I had no idea what financial crime, sanctions, any of that was. And we didn't have anybody whose job was solely that right then. At that point in time, I did 2 main things and I was trying to do a third thing. The 2 main things I was doing, firstly, I was working any operational task that needed doing that came about from the very few prepaid cards that we were starting to hand out. So that would be somebody has spent money at a brand new merchant. And we had this task that was like merchant enrichment. So I would go try and find the logo for that merchant and I would put it in our business operations tool. I would change the MasterCard code to something that resembled what actually the merchant was. I would make sure that anytime anyone else spent money at that merchant, instead of saying 563 EC2 star XY, it said Starbucks and there was a logo. So I was doing that kind of thing to start with. And then the other thing I was doing was I started pretty quickly setting up our card distribution system. So I would literally put cards in an envelope, put a name and address on them, and send them out. There is a photo of my hand putting the first envelopes in a post box, and those were the first ever Monzo cards that were sent out. And then
Monzo's corporate headquarters right now.
Yeah, and that evolved into a relationship with Royal Mail, and then picking up the mail every day, and then ultimately, obviously, a much, much bigger operation on that side. And then the third thing that I was trying to do, but not very well, was I was trying to code. Right? I had just done this coding course, and I loved it. It was the most interesting thing I'd ever done until that point. But I was joining a team of 12 people with some of the most exceptional, most senior engineers in the UK at that time, and they were building a bank. And I had just done 3 months of essentially front-end coding with a little bit of back-end JavaScript. And they were like, cool, you can try and help. And I pretty quickly realized that I could not help at all. And so I stopped doing that, and I focused on the biz ops work. About 5 months into that, we had some fraud. So by that point, we had some thousands of people that had visited our office and we had given cards to. And then we started sending them out through this process that I had set up. And then we started seeing some fraud. And I was asked to deal with that. And that was my very first interaction with anything to do with financial crime. What I later realized was that I still believe financial crime or anti-financial crime is the perfect mix of law, accounting, and coding. And I had, by luck, done those things and then been asked to deal with this fraud. And I loved it. I was investigating accounts. I was deciding if people were fraudsters or whether this was just like a standard transaction. I guess I'm inherently nosy. I was investigating people. I was looking what they were doing, looking at their backgrounds, Googling them, doing all this cool stuff. And it was awesome. I loved it. And that was my first taste of compliance and financial crime.
Your first dose of negative news right there. Yeah,
Do you know what? There was a moment in time, and this is probably now probably fast forward 9 months or a year. I've been at Monzo for maybe a year or 18 months. I am leading maybe 2 or 3 people, and we are dealing with all of the financial crime related work that's coming into Monzo. We've probably got 10, 20, 50,000 customers. And I was spending a huge amount of time reviewing PEP alerts. So politically exposed people in the UK, domestic PEPs are considered PEPs, unlike in the US, which is something that is very odd and I disagree with as a point of policy, but put that aside for a second. We were reviewing a lot of PEP alerts, and I was dreaming about them, and I was talking about PEP alerts in my sleep, and my wife would wake me up and be like, shut up. I have to hear enough about PEPs in the daytime. I do not want to be woken up to hear PEPs.
Did she think it was somebody else?
Oh, no, she knew exactly what was going on. She was like, this is not okay. Your relationship with Monzo is already unhealthy.
No, so I mean, you started out, you kind of were that give me anything and I'll fix it type role, and then they threw you into this. And it was less about the overall setting policies and procedures, but it sounds like more you fell in love with the investigation side.
Absolutely. I totally fell in love with the investigation side. I started leading this team, doing all the investigations, doing all of the operational work to do with anything financial crime related. I was working with our engineers to help define the rules that we would build in our in-house transaction monitoring system. I was starting to build a little team. We had decided to have engineers within our financial crime team. All that was happening because we were onboarding people to what was a prepaid debit card. We had a bank sponsor. So think of the Chime model. We were essentially Chime in the UK. We had a bank partner like they have Bancorp. And that was all happening. And we were growing super fast with no spend on marketing. It was all organic growth. It was super exciting. At the same time, we were applying for a banking license. And I was lucky enough to be part of that process. And I wrote the policies and procedures to help us get that banking license from the financial crime perspective. And I wrote that hand in hand with a contractor that we had brought in who was a financial crime compliance veteran, tons of experience, Gemma Rogers. And she brought the view of this is how banks do anti-financial crime and compliance. And I brought the view of we can use technology. These are real world people. I'm reading this regulation, we should do it this way. And the two of us worked really well collaborating on what is compliant, what is a great customer experience, what should be like how every bank does it, because that's sensible, and also what should we change because we don't have to do this just like every other bank. We're a technology company. We've got these other tools, these other ways of doing things that we think would be better and compliant. And so let's try something new. And through that process, we ended up with what I still believe was like a pretty innovative at the time set of policies and procedures that got reviewed by the FCA and the PRA and enabled us to get our banking license.
It's amazing. The whole story is like, it's one of the best parts of this job that we do is just hearing how different people got to where they are and how you started way, way out in a different space and then came to this kind of area, which then leads to the question, how did cable come about?
Okay, so I spent in total about 4.5 years at Monzo. We went from no customers to 4.5 million customers on the consumer side. We had just launched business banking. We had maybe 10 or 20,000 businesses at that point. I had been head of financial crime for 3.5 years. The team that I was leading was about 40 people, and our mandate was what we called first line of defense. Now, we had a broad remit in the first line of defense, and we had a pretty thin second line of defense. I think this has now changed. So this is purely just how it was pre-2020. Our mandate in the first line of defense was not only to build all of the controls that we needed in the financial crime space. So we built everything from onboarding, fraud detection, sanction screening. We built transaction monitoring in-house, and we even submitted SARs within our team. And then our second line was a fairly thin second line. And their job, of course, was to independently test whether our controls were working, give us feedback, make sure we were compliant. And that team, well, I had 40 people in our world. Half were engineers and data scientists, half were subject matter experts, 20 years of experience at HSBC and Lloyds and so on. And this thin second line would come to me once a month and they would say, we've manually looked at 10 of the 4.5 million accounts that we have. And here's how well we think your controls are working. And then we paid KPMG $100,000 a year, and they would manually review 100 of our 4.5 million accounts. And they would give us this big report, and it would tell us where our controls are working and not working and how to make them more effective. And I was just like a bit blown away, honestly, by the amount of technology and engineering and data expertise that I had available to me and the awesome tools that we built in the first line, and the absolute lack of anything that anybody doing any review of controls had available. And at that time, we were starting to hear about banking as a service. It wasn't yet called embedded banking, I don't think, or embedded finance. And we had also just launched in the US with Sutton Bank. So we were doing this embedded banking or banking as a service structure in the US. And I thought that structure made absolutely no sense. Why would you ever lend your license to anybody ever if you don't know that they're compliant? And how can testing 10 accounts a month of a fast growing fintech ever give you enough comfort to sit in front of a regulator and say that you know what the hell is going on? Like, I still just do not believe that anyone who does that knows what's going on. And I was pretty burnt out from my time at Monzo. I wanted a change. I knew I wanted to leave. I handed in my notice, and then I agreed to work for 4 or 4.5 months in order to find my replacement, make sure that they were joining, make sure the team was fully set up. So I worked longer than my notice period, hired my replacement. That all happened. And then when I left, I spent, I think, probably 3 or 4 months trying to figure out if there was a potential business here in understanding the effectiveness of controls in an automated way. I wanted to take in all of the data, all the transactions, all the customers, all the results of any controls being done, the KYC checks, the EDD checks, the transaction monitoring checks. And I wanted to be able to automatically tell if a bank or a fintech was compliant. And when we do that on the control side, we do that with KYC, we do that with EDD, we do that with TM. Why on earth was this not possible in testing if those things work, which is a regulatory requirement? And so I spent 3, 4, 5 months rewriting this business plan, speaking to all of my contacts in the UK, raised a pre-seed round, a little bit of money, and launched Cable to automate control testing. And that's what we've done.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, did you do a lot of the coding on the initial idea? Zero coding?
No,
That is a great question.
I made our first website, which is still like a joke internally because it is so ugly. I am now writing code, or should I say, giving prompts to Claude Code to write code. But no, I have not done any coding for a long time, and that still makes me sad because I loved it very much. But now with the world that we live in and with AI, I don't think anyone's going to be doing that much longer.
So
You go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, from a clientele perspective, BaaS banks seem to be the most ideal. Obviously, we started working with them in a different time, kind of when they first started coming out here in the States as well, just because they were trying to take on all this business and they were not obviously properly staffed for any of it. But do you see this as a consistent pattern between BaaS banks, between other banks that you're working with, where everyone, including the large banks, just use a small sample size for their testing?
Oh, for sure. There's one bank I've ever spoken to who has automated any of this truly, which is Goldman Sachs, which is interesting that they're the first big bank to come out with this Anthropic relationship and getting Anthropic with some forward deployed engineers to actually build some of the automation on the compliance side. In my experience, having spoken to a lot of banks, mostly in the US over the last 6 years, they are the ones who have built the most internally. Apart from them, almost everyone I have spoken to ever, manual samples.
Now, do you think you find it challenging? Like, is your biggest challenge to convince heads of compliance or CCOs to sell upward this product? Meaning, like, you're having an easy time selling to them, but they're having a tough time selling upwards to the business?
Not always. There's a lot of challenges with a lot of what we're doing at Cable, right? The first thing is selling to compliance officers. Inherently conservative people want to really try to just like not rock the boat in a lot of cases. Selling to banks, long sales cycles, conservative organizations as a whole. Why you don't get fired for buying Actimize. If you try something new and it goes wrong, you might. And then selling into banking as a service, specifically, this new thing, what are we going to do here? Let's like just do everything manually to start with, right? So there's a lot of challenges, and it's been a lot of case by case learnings here. We have sold to some compliance officers where the compliance officer has been like, I get this immediately. This makes total sense. And I'm in an organization where I can push this through. I'm thinking of Chris Mastrangelo at Grasshopper Bank. He immediately understood the value here as they launched banking as a service. And Mike, the CEO, just like totally got it. And we've been partnered with them for a long time. There are other examples of compliance officers who get it, who, yes, they struggle to get it through. They understand the value, and it is difficult to try to persuade their CEO, their board to get on board. And then there's other times, honestly, where I'm talking to compliance officers and they're like, I've been in this role for 25 years and I can be here for another 10 and I just need to not rock the boat, and they don't want anything to do with it. So it's a big, it's very different, all sorts of conversations that we have, all sorts of challenges that we face.
Do you find that most BaaS banks in particular embrace technology and they embrace automation, or they're more, all right, we saw this opportunity, we see this as a quick way to make money, we're not as compliant, we're fixing that a little bit, I don't know if we want to spend more money?
I think it's changed. I actually recently, I did a webinar a couple of weeks ago with Chris Rigoni and Patrick Slane, both who have been in this space at multiple banks and have built multiple BaaS programs. And we were talking about how things have changed sort of pre-24-25 to now. Pre-24-25, there were a lot of banks getting into this space who I don't think had considered the staffing that was needed, the technology that was needed. They were just jumping in, and things either went wrong or were clearly going to go wrong. And so they either have gotten out of this space again, or they're slowing down significantly. And in that time, no, I was speaking to a lot of people who didn't understand a lot of what was needed to be done to launch BaaS successfully. Fast forward to where we are today, we're seeing a lot of people getting into BaaS. We're seeing a lot of BaaS banks expand. And it feels now like there are a lot more bigger banks getting involved. A lot of banks that don't need to do this from a defensive M&A, need to build up some more deposits, like make ourselves bigger perspective. They are just, this is a sensible revenue stream. And if we do it correctly, it can be really successful for us. And there are some smaller banks getting into it again who have learned from all those mistakes that some other banks made 2-3 years ago, and they are coming at it with a slightly different view. So I think it's changed either side of that sort of 24-25 period of time. And now, yes, there's a lot more appetite for automation. There's a lot more appetite for we need the right people, we need the right tools. And now there are a lot of people around in the industry who are moving around and doing embedded banking as a service for their second or third time. And that's really helping a lot of those banks.
Do you find that a lot of these banks, if they do embrace change, the line that a lot of people say now is, I need you to cut people, use AI to create efficiencies. I hate that statement, but do you think that's something that's realistic for some of these BaaS-sized banks?
Ultimately, yes, but it is not that simple.
Nothing is.
So, yeah, I guess what I mean by that, we're seeing this weird thing happen where banks are saying, tell me about your AI product. And I'm like, well, what is it you're trying to solve? And they're like, we need to automate. What is AI? We need agents. And it's like, okay, but what's your problem that you're trying to solve? Let's start there. And they have no interest in talking about that. They have been given a mandate to get agents into the bank. And that approach is just, from my perspective, ludicrous. It's going to just end badly. On the other hand, there are some banks who are approaching this in a really sensible way. They're using tools in the first line, like Breton AI, obviously just raised a huge round, that are able to, those people are no longer having nightmares about pep tasks. And that's awesome. And that's a great use for AI. And that is the place that I think a lot of banks should be starting when they're thinking about how to use AI to either reduce headcount or reduce hiring plans for the future. The way that I really think about this, if you're trying to launch BaaS, is if you launch BaaS pre-AI, you're going to have to hire people for every maybe 2 or 3 fintechs that you onboard, because you're going to have oversight. Now, in my opinion, that oversight will still be massively lower than what you actually need. It will still be sample based. It will still be 10 to 50 samples a month from each of your fintechs, which I don't believe is enough. How can you sit in front of a regulator and say you know what's going on when you're sampling less than 5% of accounts? You tell me. But there are, either you have to add people or you introduce technology. And in banking as a service specifically, that's really where Cable comes in. You're launching BaaS, you want to add multiple fintechs. We can help you do that without you having to add a new headcount for every fintech that you onboard, just for oversight. And that doesn't come in all the, the program management or the policy and procedure refreshes, all that stuff, all those things that, are in the Cable platform. You can use AI and you can use technology to really help reduce headcount there. If we're talking about non-BaaS, just a regular bank, I think the most sensible place to start is how can you use AI to reduce headcount for those operationally heavy tasks like PEP, OFAC, transaction monitoring. Breton and others are doing a great job there. And then it's about oversight and assurance, which is where Cable comes in.
Or just continue to say AI agents. Just consistently say AI
Give me an agent. I don't know what for, but give me an agent.
That's the best way to get business. Just say agents. I got agents for you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I'm out of line.
Obviously, there's been a bunch of different companies that you've worked with, that we've worked with, whether they be early stage, whether they be not. You obviously own and operate an early stage company. What do you look for when you're trying to hire some of your people? Personality-wise, not necessarily skills, because there are all different types of jobs.
In hindsight, and looking back at all the hiring and the right decisions I've made and some of the wrong decisions I've made at Cable, and there have been plenty of both, the thing that has stood out really is my first instinct, that gut feel I had, was always right. And when I have been persuaded or persuaded myself to hire somebody against that initial gut instinct, it has always failed. The things I look for are resilience, are evidence and signs of people having overcome difficult times. That doesn't mean necessarily difficult times in their life, although it could mean that. It could be a difficult thing at work. It could be a sporting competition. I love hiring sports people. They're always the best. But there has to be some evidence of this person knows how to get themselves out of a hole. This person knows how to put one foot in front of the other when it seems really, really hard. And they can do that without much direction. And they will work through quite a lot of pain, a lot of hard work that gets them out of that hole and moves them forward and makes them more successful in their career or in their life, wherever it is. That's the kind of thing I look for mostly when I'm hiring somebody.
And how do you find that out in an interview? It's you always find out after the fact if what they said in an interview is real. But how do you get that gut feeling that they can get through the mud when it gets thick?
I only ever ask one question when I'm hiring. And I ask them to tell me their story.
Okay.
And I ask them to tell me their story right from the beginning. And I ask some clarifying questions and I jump in and I ask them to go a little bit deeper here or there. And that question gives me everything I need to know. It tells me, can they coherently communicate 30, 40, 50 years of their life, which is an important skill. Can they identify the points in that life that they've lived that are going to be important for me to hear? And does the story that they tell me actually give me the insights that I need into what they are achieving and what they've achieved and what they want to do and the things they've been through, to give me confidence that they can do this job.
It's interesting. It was well said. It's interesting because we obviously talk to hiring managers all the time and they ask different types of questions. Like I spoke to someone just the other day, their whole interview style is talking someone out of the job. I'm going to tell you everything that's wrong and everything terrible that's going on. And if you still want the job, we're going to keep considering you. And again, it's a very upfront model, which I like that. Just like yours, it's different. You get a gut feeling, especially in the startup space.
Yeah. I think what you say is really interesting to me, or what you've said, or that question, because in the recruiting, no one goes to school to be a recruiter, right? Like my mentor says, fell ass backwards into this job, and I got lucky, but I had that I am not going to quit unless you fire. I'm going to keep this job unless you fire me type of mentality, right? I'm not gonna lose, so I'm not gonna give up. So, like having that, what I'm getting is, and I want to go back to your story at the beginning of this discussion. It seems like grit is what's most important. The most important fundamental skill in getting it. Having the skills to get the job done is one thing, but having the grit to use those skills successfully through the hard times is what you're looking for in the best candidate. And it makes me think of like what you said earlier about your story. It seemed like a combination of happy accidents with deliberate decisions. And I really wanted to ask you more about that and how other people who are watching this can use your story to maybe take the next step in their career. And let me explain. So you didn't become the head of financial crimes on purpose, right? Like you wanted to get into the banking space, right? You sent that email to the CEO of Monzo, which led to some random event that you planned, which led to you doing the whole Netflix, putting the envelope in the box, right? And that led to fraud, right? Which you learned is what got you up in the morning, right? Peps, right? Kept you up.
Kept me up at night.
How that story, right? But also you went to San Francisco because you wanted to learn how to code and you love to code, but you're not doing it actively now. But you made that decision to do it. you learned what you learned at Monzo, and you took that and you started a company from scratch, and now you're going through the ins and outs of being the CEO of a startup, which, knowing the hard things about hard things, right? Like it's not easy. Taking all of that, could you be able to like sum up in short form, long form, like some advice to give to the people that are watching about how to, if you're an AML officer and you want to become a BSA officer, or if you're an AML officer and you have this great idea, and I want to do what Natasha's doing, like, do you have any advice to those people? I stumped her. Yeah.
I think I have three things that I would suggest. Yeah. The first is just do something. Doing something is every single time better than doing nothing. I knew pretty early on during my time at Ernst & Young that I did not want to be there beyond my 3-year graduate scheme. But I knew that if I left during it, it would be worse for me. And so doing something, even if I didn't enjoy it, even if I knew it wasn't forever, is better than doing nothing. Getting a job, actually in anything at all, is better than doing nothing. So if you're at the beginning of your career, do something. If nothing else, learn what you don't want to do, because that will help. And during that process, you will make contacts and you will learn new skills, and that will be helpful. Then, like, kind of fast forwarding, I think the next thing is no one has a clue what they're doing, period. And so when I was thinking about starting cable, I was like, how do I register a company? How do I find a meeting with an investor? Who do I speak to take money from? I didn't know any of it. I didn't know how to build the first bit of our code base to like even think about the product that I imagined. I like had this imagination of this thing that people would use, and I could see it, but I had absolutely no idea how to get it on someone's computer. But the thing that I realized was no one ever does. No one knows anything about anything, and they only learn through trying. So if you want to do something, you must not feel too scared to try. I wrote this blog years ago, right when I was starting cable actually, called Imposter Syndrome is My Superpower. And I maintain that. Like, I think that most people who are grounded, sensible humans who have not been distorted by billions of dollars have imposter syndrome. And I think it is their superpower. The things that I find scary mean that I go ask for help from the right people, mean that I go read something and learn something. And if you don't have imposter syndrome, then I worry about the morals, the ethics that you choose to live by, the style of company that you want to build. All of those things, like, I think are grounded in, like, none of us know what the fuck we're doing. And that's really what imposter syndrome is. And that helps you. So that's the second thing. Like, no one knows what they're doing. And don't be scared because you think that everyone else has it figured out. They do not. And then the third thing that I would suggest is starting today is better than thinking about it tomorrow. I started cable when my wife was heavily pregnant with our first child. I signed the term sheet for our pre-seed round the week before my daughter was born. If I had waited just a week, I would have realized how little sleep I was going to get. I would have realized that I had this child that I had to keep alive, and that my wife was like not doing great and was in bed, and there was no way I would have signed that term sheet. And it has been incredibly, incredibly challenging doing cable. Why we now have 2 kids. If I had waited a day, it wouldn't have happened. And so the third thing is jump in. So doing something is better than doing nothing. No one has a clue what they're doing. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this. Sorry.
Go for it, please.
So doing something is better than doing nothing. No one has a clue what they're doing, and doing something today is better than thinking about it tomorrow. I guess those are 3 things I would say.
I love that. I actually recently read something where motivation actually comes from after you start doing something, not before.
Right? Yeah, that's interesting, right? Yeah. Like, as soon as you've committed to doing something, there is at least one person that you're letting down if you stop. So you just keep going.
Yeah. And
Just gotta
action
keep
beats
going.
fear, and you don't need resources, you need resourcefulness. I'm not coming up with these things. I just read these aphorisms and I
Yeah, Sanjeev is
sound
reading
smart
off all the
saying
home
myself.
goods signs in his office.
Like, yeah, right. But no, first of all, that was amazing. Thank you. That was exactly the answer that I think everyone
But
wants
to
to hear.
anyone listening, I just made that up on the fly. So I don't even know what I'm talking about. So case in point, right? You just got to keep going.
Well, Natasha, thank you so much for your time today. I mean, it was awesome speaking with you. Everyone go follow her on her page. Everyone go check out Cable. And if you have any questions, obviously you can reach out to her. You can reach out to us. Thank you again for the time.
Thanks so much for chatting with me. This was really fun.
Thanks, Tasha. Bye.
Bye.